I was flattered and a bit surprised maybe when Tom called quite recently to ask me to be a part of this conference, and I kind of didn't know how I was fitting into this. I'm certainly not an expert on endangered species policy or even practices with a lot of endangered species. While I have some experience working with endangered species on various projects, but Tom felt that what we're doing, the work we're doing at St. William's Nursery and Ecology Center is something that's innovative and pertinent to the broader management of endangered species, and I tend to agree with him, and I thought it was worth coming and talking about what we do. I'm going to take a definitely a little bit less maybe politically charged kind of talk here, and it's going to be, it's the end of the day, so a lot of pictures, and I'm going to keep it light. I just do want to talk from a more practical perspective in terms of ecological restoration and biodiversity conservation, but with a focus on biodiversity conservation and restoration in developed landscapes and how that relates both directly and indirectly to endangered species. There's been some great presentations here today, and one of the things that I did note is there seems to be, and certainly not in all presentations, but in some industries, some sectors, you really see a separation of where we can do habitat enhancement, and I've always been interested, I guess, in integration of ecology and economics and where we can make these systems work together. I mean, farming is a great example of that. Not always, but there's opportunity. Forestry, for example, also. And I think we can do it and need to do it in broader areas. So my title, Bringing Ontario's Nature Home, what I've done is I've sort of plagiarized that, or at least I've borrowed that, Bringing Nature Home. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the book by Professor Tellamy out of University of Delaware. He's an entomologist, ecologist, and if you get anything out of my talk today, and forget about St. William's, I encourage you to grab that book if you haven't read it. It's a great read, both for scientists, conservationists, and also lay people. About the need that we need to integrate, bring back in on a large scale into all of our landscapes, develop, not develop, but certainly the developed landscapes, getting native species back in, because if we don't see these things, if they're not part of that landscape, we sort of forget about them. And also the importance and again, how much of that landscape is developed. I think we're kind of, we've heard it again, we're running out of space for development, we're running out of space for farming, we're running out of space for biodiversity conservation. We should be doing it in our backyards, and that's a great book, and I encourage you to read that. The picture up here is just a personal connection that I had with a species at risk. This picture was done 100 years ago, actually, and it's signed by my grandfather in 1913, and he would have been a boy of 9. Did this sketch for a school art project or something. I didn't talk to him. I didn't get this till after he had passed away. But it's American Sweet Chestnut, and the title reads Seed Time and Harvest. And it just made me think how many 9-year-old kids would even recognize, in terms of our total population, an oak tree or an acorn, let alone a tree like this. And at that time, it was a part of their landscape. There would have been 500,000 of these in southern Ontario. Today, you're lucky if you can find, if you see one, if you even know that it exists. Hopefully they will be recovered, but it just shows how in a generation that species essentially has been lost. The insects and the other things that are connected to it, we have no idea what else has been lost. These things, the endangered species are really just canaries in the mine, as I see it, and they're warnings. And we go back to, we've heard it again from some of the, the groups that have been up here, whether it be conservation authorities or Aboriginal groups that have spoken about the need to educate and re-engage. And there's some great work going on. Again, I just put this up, some early conservationist wisdoms about, everything's connected. So again, there's a little bit of danger of just focusing too much on endangered species and forgetting about all the other native species that are part of the equation. So my background has been ecological restoration. I've worked, as introduced, on the 407 extensions. This is a fairly large-scale restoration project. We did about 30 hectares of restoration associated with that project. And the big thing with doing any sort of restoration, to do it well, on this scale is that we need the plant materials, the seed, to do good quality restoration, and I'll talk more about that. I've been interested in I mean, there's a lot of space in our landscape, in developed landscape, be roadside edges. We had a talk about roads here today. Certainly we don't want necessarily endangered species living right along the edge of highways, because those can be a sink for road kills. But interesting photograph here just to show a benefit of using native species, not necessarily endangered species, along our highways. And I've been interested in this for some time. On the left-hand side, or depending which way you're looking at, but the brown picture is a roadside, conventional, exotic, smooth brome, fescues that are typically planted or grow along our roadsides. And the other, not about a mile away, is a restored prairie grass along a country road. And you can see the difference in color in terms of how brilliant and green and photosynthesizing. This was a 32-degree day probably 2 years ago. And the environmental benefits of that green road, it's transpiring, it's cooling the environment, there's habitat for insects, it's sequestering carbon. The other side is a desert, it's waste space, it's doing nothing. And the other problem with roadside edges is that when we put those exotics in, they seem to be the species that can be invaded by, for example, Phragmites and these other more aggressive exotics, where the natives, once established, there's challenges, but once established, they seem to be more reflective of these exotics. And if you look at the landscape, and we talk about protecting these, core areas for endangered species, one of the problems is that, and we heard this, the connection and the roads running at very close, all through the landscape, are conduits for the movement of those invasive species. So, forestry farming, I've worn many hats. I did some horse logging as part of a restoration project in a past life. So we've talked about that. I just want to introduce some of you, certainly many of you maybe, but will know Mary Gartshore. She's a partner and a pioneer in ecological restoration. She's a partner with us at St. William's Nursery and Ecology Center. I was fortunate enough to meet her about 20 years ago and heard her speak and was inspired. And she's just brings a wealth of knowledge and capacity to our business there. Mary was, as I say, one of the pioneers. This is her out burning their prairie. It's the largest 60-acre, it's the largest privately owned restored prairie in southern Ontario. And it's interesting, we talk about economic systems. That is actually a farm. It's an operational farm. The Terrafilla, the company that her and her partner Peter Carson operated, earned on average about $1,000 clear a year on that 60 acres of land, which is pretty good return with virtually no inputs other than burning it in the spring. And I think we saw a photo of the sort of recovery of that within a very short time. So it's creating habitat. It's a viable farm system where we can earn economics and have environmental benefit. Again, an integration of ecology and other land use. Again, St. William's and Terrafilla have been involved with the NCC on some of the projects we heard. This is the South Walsingham sand plain. It's about I would say probably there's 2,000 hectares and a total of almost 4,000 or 5,000 hectares, I'm not sure the exact numbers, that have been purchased and about half of that, so the 2,000 hectares is being restored in that area, and we're involved with that work. So this is what it looks like sort of a year after planting, and that's eventually will be a reforested area. We've direct sown trees into that site. But the point I want to make about whether it's on roadsides or with mine site restoration or these large habitat restorations or in even urban settings and backyards, to do restoration, you have to have the genetic material. You have to have the right genetic material, and you have to have it in quantity and at a price that you can make this work. Too often, and a big part of the problem that we're faced with in terms of endangered species is a result of what our horticultural industry, not any fault of their own, but what it is and sort of was and still continues to be in terms of the way we import and move plants around this planet. And I mean, if you look at the number of trees that are imported into this province from Oregon, I think most people would be shocked, but that's where a lot of our landscaping trees come from. And this was really the impetus for us as restoration ecologists trying to do these projects, looking around the landscape and saying, why aren't we growing our own wild type, our own Ontario native plants on a scale that we can actually restore the landscape? And so about 3 years ago, we were working on the Red Hill at the time, and an opportunity came up where we needed space to grow plant material for the project. And a company, Forest Care, that operated at St. Williams at the time. St. Williams was actually the first forestry station in Canada, set up in 1908. It didn't look like this. It was all bare root production. Forest Care, it was privatized in 2000, around 2000, when the government got out of the forest nursery sector, or business, as it were. And so we have 10 acres of greenhouse that were built by Forest Care, basically to supply the seedlings for the northern forestry market. We can produce, if we want to go back to that, what they were doing, 40 million little spruce trees a year in our facilities there. So we can produce a lot of trees. And what we decided when we were working there using that space, and we approached the owners who had sort of hit on hard times because of the downturn in the forestry sector. I think we're planting, instead of something like 160 million trees in Northern Ontario, it's, well, I don't know if it's at 60, I forget the numbers, but it's drastically down. We do less than 20 million trees to 25 million in Northern Ontario, I think, are the numbers now. So we thought we could use that capacity, in our wisdom, that we could actually produce a whole biodiversity, a much, for the biodiversity market, for the ecological restoration market. So now we produce, at this point, over 300 species instead of something like 8 species of trees, wildflowers. We produce seed, potted stock. I'll just flip through some of the pictures here. How we scale up for seed, for example, again, we use the capacity of the nursery. We have a $20 million facility there in terms of warehouse, greenhouse, 300 acres of land. And what we do is we send our botanists out. We collect seed from wild populations. We bring a small amount of seed back, clean it, purify it, test it. We put it through into the greenhouse, and we can grow hundreds of thousands of plugs. Then we can roll that within a matter of 6 to 8 weeks out into our field production areas and be producing wild type seed. If you're going to do restoration, ecological restoration, you have to use the right local ecotypes to do it. Importation, going to any of the big seed brokers and buying seed at this point in Ontario, I can tell you, as an ecologist, is not something that I support. It's not ecological restoration. To me, it creates more problems than it does, even though most people wouldn't recognize that. Just some of our seed rows out in the production fields. Again, some people say landscaping with natives wouldn't be beautiful. If you see our fields, I think you'd be convinced otherwise. It's spectacular in season. We've been able to scale up. We've gone from a lot of the nurseries that existed to support ecological restoration up to this point in Ontario have either been not interested in growing natives, or they've been fairly small scale MAPA operations. There are some reasonable size, but they can't keep up with the demand. And our big challenge is in competing against the importation of really what is not the appropriate materials for ecological restoration in Ontario. Just some pictures, I think, of wild ginger and maybe Virginia bluebell, marsh marigold in our production. I don't need to go back. You can see the little white stakes, the tags that were on that last photo, and here is why I put that photo up. We're more than just a nursery. Other nurseries sort of track product by product type. We track everything by seed source. So those, essentially, we're a conservation organization. I can, anywhere in the nursery, go and pull that tag and go check the database, and I know whether that came from somewhere north of London or by Windsor or east of Toronto in the Durham region. So we're tracking where these populations of plants are coming from and then growing, and then ideally getting them back into certain areas. We sell back to the zones where we've harvested the material from and scaled it up. So one of the challenges is in the whole marketing of this is, and we've come up with, that's our seed collection form. I've just thrown that up there that shows the kind of information. So we have GPS coordinates, information on the seed, information on the habitat that the plants came from. But the logo, we're trying to come up with a way to brand as a private business how we differentiate when you buy a an oak tree, a red oak from some other nursery versus an oak that we've invested the time in to know, because there's added cost to do what we're doing in terms of the source identified. So it's about source identified, and source identified should be the mantra when we get into ecological restoration. We shouldn't be using cultivars. We shouldn't be using trees that were grown in Oregon that who knows where the genetics are from. In the U.S., they've had the advantage, I guess, or they're ahead of us certainly with this. They've had a lot of government support in developing this around their different road programs and conservation programs, such that they have government or agency-supported standardization and certification of seed source. So they have source-identified ecotypes, and you can find those all over the country. And again, the markets have been developed and supported because they require this in their projects. So it's really about the end users and what you specify that's going to drive the market. We don't have that luxury. We're trying to educate as we go and convince people that this is it's better to use Ontario-grown product and known that it's Ontario seed source for a number of reasons, certainly the ecological ones, and there are other practical reasons that we try to sell as well. So that's the quick and dirty. I don't know how I'm doing on time because I got a couple minutes. Okay. So just in a nutshell, then it's about we've tried to take a nursery and scale it up so that we have that we can supply to this ever increasing demand as we see it for source identified plant material. One of the things I had a few slides after because I wasn't sure where I was going, but another area of sort of infrastructure integration with ecology that's interested me is the whole idea of green roofs, and Toronto obviously has their green roof policy, and we kind of hear about that, but I know there is activity going on. It's an area where I think in an urban environment, I wasn't that, I guess, sold on the idea when I looked at what the green roof sort of industry was presenting in terms of sedum, stone crops, sort of a European model. And it certainly wasn't, the major industry of green roofs isn't interested in natives. But we can put native species on top of roof systems, and beautiful. We have alvars, and these are quality systems we're able to grow up on these rooftops. We even have wetland systems up on rooftops that are quite diverse, and they attract a lot of insects and birds. Russ was sitting with at a table, and we were talking a bit about it. He said, well, you want to be careful when you get into this that you don't end up getting endangered species nesting up here, or you won't be able to repair your roof. And he may have a point. Safe harbor, there you go. So just the one thing that's interesting, and it's I met up with a very smart fellow, Professor Paul Mankiewicz out of New York City, and I was really interested in a product, Gaia soil, that we've used and been able, because one of the problems with growing natives on rooftops has been in the soil media. If you use conventional media that they grow sedums in, sedums are like, if you don't know what they are, kind of like they're succulent plants, like cactus without thorns. They can grow on rock, basically. And our native plants can't. We have to give them something more than that. But this Gaia soil it's an interesting product. It has great properties. The key factor of it is it's 90% waste stream recycled styrofoam that we're using to grow our plants in. So it's very light, but it has properties like a natural soil. And we're actually able to create like gravelly soils or sandy soils. And one of the things when I first looked at it, I thought, when we go to space, this is the kind of thing we need to be growing our crops in. And we can grow incredible, it's incredible how the stuff does grow. We've created a swale system, so I said we can do wetlands. Stormwater management on rooftops will become a big reality, and we're working on that now. We think we can do a lot of stormwater management on rooftops. And as well, you'd have the benefits of biodiversity and cooling in the urban environment. Economically, my belief is that green roofs make a lot more sense probably than wind or solar when you start to look at the energy savings that this will do in the future. It's out there. It's something we're working on right now. So anyway, that's my talk.